You can just press got it.
Okay. Okay, I think we're ready.
Voila. Okay. Thank you so much. See you. We're going to let folks in now.
Welcome. Maybe Eleanor, you'll let me know when everybody is in. So or Chloe, you can let me know when everyone's in. I think people are still coming in, which is great.
We're all here, Leonard.
We're all here. My goodness, that's fantastic. Here comes everybody. It's Joyce's Finnegan's Wake. Thank you so much, everybody, for being here. And I see, wow, I see some people I haven't seen in a long time, like the historian David Hoffman. So nice you're here. And I see the poet Susan Schultz at the university or in Hawaii. It's fantastic. Great to see you. And Fung Bui, the editor-in-chief of the Brooklyn Rail, who's here. So glad you're here and so glad you're doing this. And Brigitte Werneberg in Berlin. My goodness, fantastic. Great that you could come. And Mark Nasdor, hi Mark. You are a Chrome Dome like me now? Yes, it's all true. So great you can be here, and so great to have four friends who don't know one another yet, but will get to know one another now through this reading, I hope, to read for us this morning, if you're in the West Coast, this afternoon, if you're in the East Coast, and this evening, if you're in Europe, as three of the four readers are. I also see students at the Evergreen State College who are here from the difficult reading advanced literary arts class. So great you're here to participate as well. And let's go right to the reading. The order of readers today is Nimrod Bena, followed by Michel Delville, followed by Genya Turovskaya, followed by Nina Zivancevic. And then we're hoping we'll have time at the end for some conversation, question and answer, open to anyone who's in the room. So our first reader is Nimrod Bena. He's a poet from Chad who's lived in France for many, many years now. We met in 2014 or 15 through the Chinese poet Shu Tsai, who told me I absolutely had to meet Nimrod Bena, and he was absolutely correct. He's a novelist. He's a poet. He's the editor-in-chief of La Manteau et la Lyre, which is a publishing house devoted to African poetry, published in French language in France. And he's here to read. The book of his I have here with me is Petit Éloge de la Lumière Nature, which is a line he borrows from Arthur Rimbaud. And indeed, the book begins with a epigraph from Rimbaud's A Season in Hell. So please welcome Nimrod Bena.
Merci. Merci pour cette invitation. Printemps 2. Au cœur du mois de mai, voilà mon enfance se désenfuit et ses bruits et ses fureurs de concert avec les fleurs. L'ombre est fraîche et le jardin de Luxembourg reconquiert la scène estivale. L'amour se mesure enfin aux liens qui nous attachent aux autres. Il fait reluire une indépendance conquise par devers nous. Nous avons chaud, une chaleur qui nous ravit. Nous la partageons sans en vouloir à personne, riche de nos énergies à jamais refaites. L'Afrique m'est redonnée, la force en sa force même.
So these translations were done by Patrick Williamson, and this poem is called Spring 2. The height of May, my buried childhood exhumed, its noises and fury in unison with the flowers. The shade is cool, and the Luxembourg garden recaptures the summer scene. Love is measured finally by the ties that bind us to others. It brightens and independence hard won unbeknownst to us. We are hot, a warmth that delights us. We share it without resenting anyone, bountiful with our energies recharged forever. Africa restored to me, strength is its own strength.
Nuées. Les nuées déchargent leur enflure sur les chaumières. Elles conjurent leur air, leur déshérence. Je touche à l'oubli. Densifiez votre syntaxe, déité vacante. J'approuve votre exode vers de grands ciels. L'hospitalité est un don qui s'amende. Nuée, assumez ma dérade. J'aimerais tant qu'un fleuve l'arrose. Oh, qu'aux étapes imparties à ma transhumance, le repos les arrime à une rade.
Clouds. 1. The clouds discharge the bulge onto the thatched cottages. They conjure up the loneliness, their wandering, their disinheritance. I reach oblivion. 2. Densify your syntax, vacant deities. I approve of your exodus towards the vast skies. Hospitality is a sound that mends its ways. 3. Clouds accept my unmooring. I would so love a river to water it. Oh, that each stage dispensed to my transhumance, rest would anchor them to a roadstead.
Purger la nuit. Tu as purgé la nuit qui t'habitait avant même d'atteindre au seuil. Le ciel s'est éclairci tel l'arbre en appel au songe, souche d'herbe gorgée d'espoir. La nuit décante la fumée bleue des chaumières qui chambre notre âme, convoie nos secrets. Et tu penses avoir retrouvé le chemin de cette maison entrevue près d'un essart, quand des échos tissent en toi l'arrière-pays, ce jardin, sa lampe au centre des partages, alarme les morts.
Purge the night. You purged the night that was within you. Well before you reached the threshold, the sky cleared up like a tree to dreams, stumps of grass bursting with hope. The night clears the blue smoke of thatched cottages that warm our souls, convey our secrets. Then you think you've found the way to this house, glimpsed near a grove, when echoes weave in you, the hinterland, this garden. Its lamp, the center of lots, alarms the dead. Nimrod, you're muted. Nimrod, you're muted. You're muted.
Ah oui, ah oui. Merci. Mère, la place du Père, désormais vacante, n'offre de prise ni à l'air, ni à la volonté qui contredit l'instant, et cependant la croit par une force bonne. Alors survient une tante bien-aimée, sa parole charmeuse, charmante, à l'image de son pagne aux imprimés sanguines, toute fraîcheur chue sous sa taille si menue. Mon regard est marqué du sceau de long voyage. Étranger est-il aux choses jadis familières. Je pleure pour un bonjour, pour un thé à la cardamome partagé sous le margousier, lequel perd ses feuilles, petite perle d'or, ouvragée par un automne à contre-temps. Son tronc, sans bruit, s'écorce.
Mother, the now vacant place of the father offers no hold, neither to the air nor the will that contradicts the moment, and yet increases it by a kindly strength. Then a beloved aunt comes along. Her charming, bewitching words, like her blood print loincloth, all crispness fallen under her so slender waist. The stamp of long journeys marks my look. Foreign it is to once familiar things. I cry out for a hello, for a cardamom tea shared under the tree, which is losing its leaves, little golden pearls fashioned by an untimely autumn. Its trunk silently peels. For the last poem, Nimrod will be reading, translated by Frida Ekoto. I'll read the translation first, so that Nimrod could conclude with the French, with the original language of the poem. It's 4 o'clock. It's 4 o'clock at last. My heart splits my chest. My mother's features are reflected in my eyes, her features, the innate sweetness of her love. Yet I despaired on the quay of other shores, other islands of patience and trials, there in the country in the south of the war-torn country south of me. O prodigal son, long separated from your family by this border, this river's leash sprinkled with gold, and yet avoid with your hands. What currency will you pay for your passages, you fisherman, you son of smugglers, once glorious but now idle, listening to the camp and its gossip and refugees? Soldier lets that high school kid through is not an intellectual who wants nerds are not guns. Hands let the fisherman through with a tormented heart. His people are waiting for him on the other side. Love is beautiful that is shared at dusk when the kingfisher flies away. Soldier lets child into promised land.
Merci Léonard. Il est 16 heures. Il est 16 heures, enfin la frontière. Mon cœur fend ma poitrine. Les traits de ma mère se reflètent dans mes yeux. Ses traits, la douceur innée de son amour. Pourtant, j'en ai désespéré sur le quai d'autres rives, d'autres îles de patience et d'épreuve, là-bas au pays, au sud du pays en guerre, au sud de moi-même. Lycéen au fils prodigue, longtemps séparé de ta famille, par cette frontière, ce lait du fleuve saupoudré d'or, et qui cependant évide tes mains. De quelle monnaie payeras-tu ton passage, toi, le marin pêcheur, toi, le fils des passeurs jadis glorieux, mais oisif désormais, qui écoute le camp et ses cancans et ses réfugiés? Soldat, laisse passer ce lycéen, n'est pas un télo qui veut. Les intellos ne sont pas des mains à fusil. Laisse passer le marin-pêcheur au cœur tourmenté. Les siens l'attendent sur l'autre rive, l'autre port. L'amour est beau qui se partage au crépuscule quand s'envole le martin-pêcheur. Soldat, laisse entrer l'enfant en terre promise. Merci beaucoup.
Merci, Nimrod. Merci beaucoup. C'est bien. We've had a chance to read together twice now. Once you read the translations to me, and now I got to return the favor. So thank you. Our second reader is Michel Delville. He's in Liège, Belgium, from where he'll be speaking with us. He's a professor of applied poetics at the University of Liège in Belgium. He's a poet. He's a musician, played and created and played with in a number of different bands. I know Michel first from his extraordinary work of criticism, food, poetry, and the aesthetics of consumption, eating the avant-garde, which is basically a work in gastropoetics and thinking about the nature of taste and the relationship of taste and poetry. He writes about Gertrude Stein, he writes about Ponge, he writes about many other people in that book in really brilliant ways. So please let me introduce you to Michel Delville.
Thank you very much, Leonard, for this generous introduction. Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Sorry about the glitch prior to the meeting. Yeah, I'm going to read a few prose poems because this is the genre I've been studying the most, and I've also been a practicing prose poet for a number of years. And my interest in the form goes back to my formative years as a PhD student, where I was researching the American prose poem, which gave rise to a book published a while ago. And I haven't stopped writing prose poems. I could go on and on, about this form. I have lots of things to say about the form, but this is a reading, so I'm going to read a few recent pieces of mine, some of which were translated into English by John Lombardo. And I'm going to read the original pieces in French first. Speaking of Gertrude Stein, here's a poem dedicated to her. Haricots verts et ondes de contraction intestinale le lundi, chou-fleur et exercice spirituel le mardi, appareil volant, transport astral et plateau de fromage le mercredi, rôti de bœuf et libre examen le jeudi, sol meunière et exploitation des ressources du globe le vendredi, velouté de cerfeuil et pour lèche métaphysique le samedi, ravioli aux truffes et intrigues administratives le dimanche, quiche lorraine et transactions postcoloniales le lundi, salade de concombre et complexe d'électre le mardi, la Charlotte au coin et ses euphémismes montés sur la butte Montmartre le mercredi, pintade de rôti, sauce au foie gras et relent de culpabilité infondée le jeudi, champignons à l'ail et brevet d'invention le vendredi. And here's John Lombardo's version of this poem. Monday, green beans and bowel cramps. Tuesday, cauliflower and spiritual exercises. Wednesday, flying contraptions, astral transport and cheese plate. Thursday, roast beef and free inquiry. Friday, sol meunier and exploitation of global resources. Saturday, Chervil velouté and metaphysical licks. Sunday, ravioli with truffles and official hijinks. Monday, quiche Lorraine and post-colonial transactions. Tuesday, cucumber salad and an Electra complex. Wednesday, Queen's Charlotte and euphemisms calling Montmartre. Thursday, roasted Genya ham with foie gras sauce and whiffs of unfounded culpability. Friday, mushrooms with garlic and patent. Here's another recent one. It's a series, it's based on a series of portraits of famous writers and artists. And it is indeed, as Leonard pointed out, related to my interest in gastropoetics and food and the lower senses. This one is dedicated to Charles Simic, and it's about Joseph Cornell. I'm going to read the the original first, it's very short. Il est à Duchamp ce que Braque est à Picasso. Un peu plus nuancé, un peu plus méticuleux, mais aussi un peu plus sage et un peu plus docile. Infatigable chineur céleste, son travail ne connaît pas de trêve. On raconte qu'il cuisait ses boîtes à four d'eau pour leur donner une apparence plus ancienne et provoquer fissures et craquelures. La nature aussi produit du faux. Less akin to Duchamp than Braque to Picasso, a bit more subtle, a bit more meticulous, but also a bit wiser and a bit more manageable. Divine, indefatigable bargain hunter, his work knows no hiatus. They say he roasted his boxes in a low oven to make them look older and to cause them to split and crack. Nature also produces fakes. The next one is about Steve Reich. Tantôt disparaissent dans la beauté des choses, tantôt se posent, tantôt commencent à craquer et à hurler, tantôt roulent bruyamment les airs, tantôt cheval blanc, tantôt passe lentement la main sur un visage tendre, tantôt s'évanouissent derrière les rideaux, tantôt reniflent ses vêtements, honteux en regardant par terre, tantôt tout autour, tantôt couchés dans l'obscurité, tantôt disposés à le croire et à la suivre, tantôt marchent ensemble, tantôt s'élèvent et tombent, tantôt se mettent à pencher vers un point en haut, à droite, tantôt pâle et léger, tantôt rouge et dense et lourd, tantôt quelque chose, tantôt rien, tantôt éloigné, tantôt plus éloigné encore, tantôt traînant la nuit en compagnie de ses semblables, tantôt craignant d'être surpris pendant la promenade, tantôt dure longtemps, tantôt dure. Sometimes disappear into the beauty of things, sometimes touch down, sometimes begin to crack and scream, sometimes noisily roll your R's, sometimes white horse, sometimes slowly trace your hand across a delicate face, sometimes disappear behind the curtains, sometimes put his clothes on again, embarrassed, looking down at the ground, sometimes all around, sometimes lying in the dark, sometimes willing to believe and follow, sometimes walk together, sometimes rise and fall, sometimes start looking towards the top right dot, sometimes pale and light, sometimes red and dense and heavy, sometimes something, sometimes nothing, sometimes distant, sometimes even more distant, sometimes dragging the night in the company of its peers, sometimes afraid of being surprised while walking, sometimes last a long time, sometimes last. So this was a short sample of my prose poetry production. More recently, my more recent stuff, which isn't published, which hasn't been published yet, is related to another project of mine, which is pretty much an erasure project. I'm working with found texts and reducing them to different textual entities. It's a very fashionable thing to do. You know, people have erased a number of canonical texts in the United States, especially. It's very, very famous. And one thinks also of Tom Phillips's A Humament, one of the foundational moments in erasure's Poetics. But also most recent examples by American poets, ranging from Jen Bervin to, Travis McDonald and others. So this is something I wrote writing through leaves of grass. And it's called LOSS, for letters contained in Whitman's title. So this is basically an erasure of Walt Whitman's Leaves of Grass, which in many ways sounds more Dickinsonian than Whitman-esque. Wide, sliding, infinite, mocking songs to penetrate and understand. The last custom strikes her darkness dead. Back from that tremulous trial, the soul transmuting as perfume. From earth to nothing, no object nor any visible thing must foil nature. The body, grown dim for morning's continual returns, with a dirge amid strange limitless ghosts, gone through the air, then blank. And I'm going to conclude with another erasure based on Lewis Carroll's Alice in Wonderland, which is part of a multimedia project. And I may say a few words about that later if there's time. There is no other shell. The lilies on the lea. Open your face before walls start to pack up around you. And all that happened to her down there and the things in it with what, well, the air loveliest looked up. She was very fond of dark things, but trying to say little, expecting what will happen down there, never hurried back there. Why she looked again, she did not know she too was somewhere near the center. A room is big enough when it is so empty and the corners are gathered. Let the guests greet and meet. Off with her hands all finished, anxiously over and ever somewhere, you poor thing still watching the same chapter until you get sleepy and know no beginning again. Herself a longitude, sitting on time altogether once in many earths, fancy gardens, glass, wells, small and wide, down the middle. I see, oh, don't look further. Look, Alice, holding a telescope, like one possible thing out of you, while the labeled fingers grow. I have you under the stairs where him and his bats are somewhere safe. Windows shutting her mouth, and you tell me they shouted names while they held us in solid fear, till our final ardor cooled forever. Thank you.
Thank you, Michel. It'll be wonderful to hear those works as yet inédit or unpublished, and the new work is really exciting. You know, we call the reading a cross-cultural poetics, and so Nimrod Bena is working between Chad and France, or between Africa and Europe. Michel Delville is a poet in Belgium who's a scholar of American avant-garde poetry. He's working between Belgium, the French language, and American English. The third poet today is Genya Turovskaya. She was born in Kyiv, Ukraine. She's lived most of her life in New York City. She's a poet who writes in English. She's a translator from Russian, translated a number of really important contemporary Russian poets into English. She's also a psychotherapist. About her really wonderful new book, The Breathing Body of This Thought, Anne Lauterbach wrote, "Imagine you could lift time up like a lid imagined beneath a substratum of first and last particulars that form brief visionary episodes in which life's beauties and terrors glint and mutate on the, quote, floating filament of temporary vowels. In Genya Turovskaya's The Breathing Body of This Thought, the protean force of language is newly manifest in poems of sustained acuity and extraordinary power. Quote, yet it may be possible to be sung back to life. Please welcome Genya Turovskaya.
Thank you so much, Leonard. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you, Leonard, for that lovely introduction and for the invitation to read with Nimrod and Michel and Nina. And thank you, Brooklyn Rail, for hosting this. I'm going to read some newer poems, and then I'm going to read some poems from Breathing Body of This Thought. The first few poems are from an ongoing sequence that I've been working on for years, that I think I'm near completion, called Enter Ghost, about various kinds of hauntings, phantoms, visitations, and various other reverberations, historical, linguistic, emotional. So I'll read a few from that. Enter the record. Stake the claim. Compose the argument. The argument is where the line was drawn, then redrawn by the cartographers, then the cannonades, then the historians, then the grunts and frantically waving hands of an uncomprehending populace. Where the spine of the skeleton of unknown origin roots into the skull's lobed shell. Where the sun breaks against the slow-moving, white-capped waves of mountains that divide one folk choreography from another. Where language thrusts against dialect, where dialect slips its message, illicit, partisan, through the crack in the argument. Enter Ghost. All the beautiful rooms are empty. All the accounts deactivated. Calendars vacated of all spectacle, all spectacular affairs. We no longer touch each other's faces. We dream of vengeful animals escaping their electrified enclosures, suspiciously low-flying airplanes, houseplants sickening and dying from the burden of our smothering love. Enter the ambient calamity. Always there is a new season, a new redundancy in the turning leaves. Everywhere shards of some broken open paradise. Doomsday cults. Hawkers hawking a cure for the pain, and the honking geese drawing such precise V's in the sky as though in military formation over the marshlands, over yesterday's churned up mud. Can we exclude love's ghost from this geometry? Can angle and angel bend toward one another, each with its purity of purpose, each in the end in alignment of letters, in a line of words, in a message never sent to its intended recipient? It says, I will bend toward you. I was listening. I am listening still. And I will continue with a poem called Failure to Declare from Breathing Body of This Thought, which I realize borrows a line from Leonard Schwartz. borrow something from the title of one of your books, a message back to our viewers. Failure to declare. I am beside myself. I have no beast in this ring, no horse in this race. Nobody always waves goodbye. The stars are different here. The wind is gusting in reverse. I left something out, something crucial, crossing through the customs gate. The figure behind me waving, reflected in the plexiglass partition. I could recognize the shape, but not the face. I didn't need to, I knew it. An empty window, limp curtain flapping in the breeze. I pitched forward, tried to right myself, but kept falling without end, keep falling to no end. There was nothing there to catch on, snag against, a tantalizing glitter, a blatant blank. The fortune in the fortune cookie says, learn Chinese, to have a fever, and when one must, one can. Where do I live? Where do I go when I go away? The departures board was wiped clean. There was no message, but something happens to interrupt all well-laid plans. I was alert to the fog, a fugue of massing clouds, to a change in pressure, coalescing rivulets of rain, a physical vibration, the faintest tremor of the ground beneath my feet, the shifting of tectonic plates, the chafe, the plea in pleasure for pleasure's sake. Or was the fortune when one must, one can? I recognized the empty window, the tantalizing glitter of my own reflection, the shape, but not the face. I knew it, that there would be no message, no way to get a message back. I fell, I fall, I left, I leave something out. The ground beneath my feet gives way. Where were we? Here I am. Where do I go? Who is the witness to this story that I tell myself? Is this rupture, rapture, attention, inattention, the bonds grown slack? There is an errand I've been sent on, an errandsy. I am not spared. I am inside the observation tower, beside myself, astride the horse. I do not have a horse in this. Nobody ever always waves goodbye, goodbye, goodbye. The stars are different here. The stars do not make sense. I can connect these burning dots. There is a hummingbird, there, the dancing bear. There, a face with night pouring out of the black sockets of its eyes. What are these strange celestial figurations? Is any crossing safe? When does the dancing bear claw its way back to nature? When does a hummingbird become a hurricane? Which is the miracle and which the natural disaster? What is at stake? And I'll end with a slightly longer poem called The Late Arrival, Another New Year's Day. The soldiers did not have adequate training to complete the mission. Since nothing had taken place, nothing was lost, nothing needed to be recovered. The child plays quietly underfoot, her mind rippling with the gentle rhythm of its babble. The girl remained as a feeling. Through her arrival, a portal can open. I have trouble staying awake, tangled in blue swaddling on a black couch in a too spacious room. Boredom is a symptom, and anhedonia a lusterless ocean. The water's surface is briefly troubled by a breeze or the fart of some marine creature. The mind, before language, an animal presence. Through her animal presence, the girl remains insistent as hope is the heart's property. Mine was a forced entry. I have always been the late arrival my mother's labor induced. I have not been possibly or impossibly on nodding terms with the reckless astonishment, the collision out of which irrevocable life. And at that moment, as her mind is elsewhere, the blazing child twists out of her mother's grasp. Whose mind is it anyway? A person made out of ash and air, a passionate refusal, a requiem, the requisite wreaths of red carnations, tiered, cake-like. A man shows off his rope tricks, lassos a utility pole, and the rope in his hand becomes a live wire. When does the crowd observing the spectacle become aware that they are watching a man die? Are you too a failed witness? Now that I know what to do, will I do it? I am always returning to reunion, running parallel to refusal, requiem, boredom. The girl remains, conceives herself, her mind, a live wire. The crowd disperses, filling in the grid of the streets and avenues. Did I refuse my own arrival? The labor-inducing drug is called Pitocin, a flood synthetic of oxytocin. The labor described as excruciating. Excruciating is a translation or a mistranslation. My mother tongue no longer my mother's. There were only mothers at the birthing house, no fathers allowed. I had an aerial view of the city, and black water slowly rose and filled in the grid of the streets and avenues. Or was it smoke, ash, and air? The portal through which she arrives and the portal that through her will open, a harbor, a silvering skyline. At the birthing house, red-faced infants were held up to the windows. The fathers, when there were fathers, stood outside in the snow, clutching red carnations, red roses, soluble thoughts. The train pulls into the station and the connecting train pulls in and the doors open in near simultaneity and stay open exactly long enough to cross the platform from one train to another. This can be a form of happiness, consolation, this alignment, this need to be met and carried from one place to another. I slept too long and woke sad with the residue of a dream I couldn't remember except that it was sexual. I was too late. Something stood in the way of some other thing. I lost my shoes, recovered my lost shoes, and immediately lost them again. There were too many rooms. There was no room in which to be alone together. Something was amiss. The gulls were too far inland, or the ocean was too far inland. Boredom is the swaddling blue ocean, synthetic, a symptom, or the necessary condition for the mind's labor for the passing breeze. You can't force reunion, soldier, compliant and pliable, even with yourself. The gummy toothlessness of the very young and the very old is disquieting. Crust of drool silvering on the chin, all of our liquid secretions assuming solid form, all that is liquid in ourselves, all the spillage of our soluble thoughts filling in the grid, all the preludes and the lewd exertions. All of the late arrivals are sequestered, made to watch the opera televised on a screen in an anteroom. The sweat of the singers' exertions is beaded on their brows. You can almost see the vapor of the air forced lung-shaped out of their mouths. What consumes you? Fear of abandonment, electrocution, the swallowed and swallowing ocean of belonging to oneself only, aphasia, insolvency, and old age. The mission was a reconnaissance. The soldiers did not have a soldier's constitution. The medication is administered as a sublingual lozenge, as an intravenous drip, as a suppository. You have been instructed to forget and not to forget, not to gorge on the oxytocin of reunion, to soldier onward. My mother's mother tongue no longer her mother's. Where have they gone, the material and immaterial witnesses? The mind will fill in the intervals between X and Y with its unreliable testimony. O frigates on the rising ocean, O foregoing, am I too late? My frog voice cracks. How does a soldier acquire a soldier's constitution? A word is made first of sound, incendiary, the meaning follows.
Thank you, Genya, so much. Fantastic, really wonderful. I can't say enough about your book. The breathing body of this thought is just an extraordinary book from Black Square Editions. Spectacular, Nancy Hilgeson says, when does the hummingbird become a hurricane? Our fourth reader is also spectacular. She's Nina Zivancevic. She's from Serbia originally, Serbian being at least one of her first languages. She's translated back and forth between English and Serbian. We've known one another forever during her New York phase, more than a phase, her New York life. Then later she moved to Paris, and she has a whole life in Paris too. So in terms of a cross-cultural poetics between the former Yugoslavia Serbian language, the US and France. Her most recent book, or the most recent book I'm aware of, is called Roller Skating Notes. About the book, Louis Armand writes, teleported across the Iron Curtain, Zivancevic sounds the hidden alienation of a language on the brink, of mantras of the unsayable, compulsively disgorged in lieu of a politic of linguistic refuge. Poetry is not, as Adorno claimed, impossible after Auschwitz, any more than it is impossible after the Soviet Union or the present drowning of the planet in commodified junk, but the contrary. Such catastrophes make language possible in its critical poetic aspect. Please welcome Nina Zivancevic.
Thank you, Leonard. Thanks, everybody. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. I'd like to thank not only you and Carolyn and Brooklyn Vale, but all my friends who are with us tonight. Biljana Obradović, who's also a great poet, also Serbian, that is Ukrainian origin, because the Serbs came from the lower Ukraine in the 10th century to the Balkans. So we are really the Ukrainians. And this book in particular was really like a totally Ukrainian production, because it was designed by Antonia Klimenko, who's an American poet of Ukrainian origin living in Paris. And Biljana post-faced it. I mean, also made a commentary. She's with us tonight. And it all, I admit it. So because I'm aware of the time limit, I'll just try to read a couple of poems on a lighter side of the fence. I'd like to lighten up a little bit, because this was supposed to be a funny book above all. And let me read something. I have a section called like My Heroes, or people that I really respect for various reasons. And one of these poems, it's a Hollywood drama, was dedicated to Alice Notley, who was also my poetry teacher. And maybe I'll read this one. It's a Hollywood drama. These are Hollywood babes, my poetry teacher, and Chris Krause and Eileen Miles and Kathy Acker, who replaced the mythic girls Hedy Lamarr, Lana Turner, and Marlene Dietrich. As their TV producers also believed in the dream of a literary persona. But did they have as much fun while watching and writing their stuff? As much fun as we did in New York City that summer, I asked. Oh, yes, my teacher said, but they believed in a different sort of fun. They're different from us. I know this much by now. now, I know that something keeps us here in a French restaurant, staring at the clouds, howling at the moon, serving our kids, serving community at large. Soon they will call us maudit poets, strange birds, forever and ever. Forever we refuse to sell quickly our songs. This was for Alice Notley. Another one is there are heroes. There's Papa Eric Le Tendre and Joaquin Guzman El Chapo. They are my heroes too. Papa Eric, you don't have to sell advice and red balloons on the subway. We love you, as we long to hear your song from the edge of the bush. You sleep on a subway bench covered with mice and roaches. You say, tell no one that I love you. They will be even more jealous. Papa Eric, no one can love me the way you do. I'm out of nowhere, no place to go, just like you. And famous figure in the underworld, El Chapo. So they think they got you, and El Zorro and Che and Fidel Castro. And if they keep you inside the wall street dungeon, who is going to supply drugs to the Wall Street lawyers? They cannot function without your coke and yerba buena. And for the mezcal alone, the intellectuals from all these white countries will surely set you free. Perhaps you overdid it in your daily supply of the autonomous power. You audited that Mr. Invisible and gave him the wrong stuff. Your pay was getting smaller and smaller, and your family is that taller. You, hey, I do not know where you, Senor El Chapo, went wrong, but I know the prisons in California can be comfortable if enough of your pals sit in them too. Watch out for razor blades hidden in a loaf of bread, and don't take too many common showers. You are El Prince y El Gato, lord of any drug war in town. You are no terrorist, babe, and the prayer rug is safe under your feet. It's all the matter of money, some wrong payola, and those who should be in jail instead and who rule the world will need you soon to be out doing some dirty job for them. You dealt directly with the coke kings of Colombia who flew the stuff jungles to Mexico, each of their planes carrying a ton of product, and then in no time, you used to smuggle that greed into California. They called you El Rapido. Just now, listen to the song Guantanamera, and soon you will be at large and riding again. Oof. Should I? Yes, any questions? My reality matches my training with Allen Ginsberg and Alice Notley and some very illustrious people who here is for my friend and for my partner who I admire so much and who's Russian, by the way. It's called The Ballad of Stenka Razin. Did I call you my soul or my spirit or my mind? L'esprit, l'âme et le cœur. All fits into the common expression I use when I call you Dusha Maya. See, this is something the Westerners can dig into. The dog in me spelled out yet another story, in which I rushed through the door like a dodo, like an early morning casualty. Yeah, that's me, female Stenka Razin, whose real image is wrote by Ivan Brebrov's heavenly voice. What happened to Razin, to me and Billy the Kid, is something that only Robin Hood knows. And none of the anarchists you frequent here and now. It happened that I wasn't born into your great Kovsky Club, which allows you to shoot stars, chairs, and floating clouds. The act which in turn makes me love you guys, Tarkovsky, Bellatar, and newcomer Merezhkovsky. And it's only normal I hang with your gang of the riders in the storm. Into this world we're thrown, like a dog without a bone, Riders in the Storm. That was Ballad of Stenka Razin, who's a national, he's like a Russian Robin Hood, in a way. And this is also a poem, Them Russians, and maybe I'll, Them Russians. Russian Jews do not accept migrants. They are crazy the way my dad was. Port Parole says, we will not be like Egypt, who don't respect the convention. She says, we will accept them. A lady in there says, this becomes Africa. It's not Israel anymore. The other poet activist says, after Shoah, you should be ashamed to even mention such a thing. Hotline is against human trafficking of organs. The Israeli tribunal, like any other, full of honest and dishonest lawyers. A policewoman says to a man, although it is not on your visa, you can work. They just close their eyes to the fact that the Eritrean and Sudanese migrants are not allowed to work. When it comes to expulsion, the activist says, it is disgusting that these Eritreans and the Sudanese are expelled from the Ministry of Interior and not the Nigerians or the Ghanaians who can return peaceful to their blood. Story of a Bowli man who wants to transfer and bury his Bete wife. He had to show to the other tribe that he didn't kill her there in Israel. Okay, and so there are many stories like this in this particular book published by Cool Grove Press. Okay, should I read another one, or perhaps it's enough? It's a lot of.
Please read. Could you read one more poem, Nina? That would be fantastic.
Thank you. And this is also as I used to meet all these illustrious people, but I really saw them the way they were. This is my tribute to Gregory Corso, and a famous poet, quite well known of the Beat generation. And it's called Now You See It, Now You Don't. True account of Gregory Corso. Once I met Gregory in Boulder, Colorado, showed him my translations of his poetry, which he found beautiful, and wanted to try my Taurus ring on. Now you see it, now you don't see it, he said. It took Ginsberg 2 months to return my ring to me. Once I met Gregory in New York City after my incredible marijuana arrest, and having heard my story, he took $400 from his left boot where he kept money and gave it to me. Take it, kid. You'll need it for the lawyers. The story of the ring forgotten. The last time I saw him in New York, I was with my dad. Gregory jumped on us out of nowhere, cursing the commercial habits of high capitalism. Don't you come from Europe, folks, he had. Don't you have some taste and elegance? You don't need this junk to fill your brain with nonsense, he said, and then disappeared into Astor Place, muggy dust forever. Thank you.
Thank you, Nina, so much. That's terrific. And yes, Allen Ginsberg and Gregory Corso, and you had the first poem for Alice Notley, and I wanted to mention that Alice Notley's son, the poet Anselm Berrigan, was the curator of this series at the Brooklyn Rail. Just recently stepped down. I wanted to thank Anselm for asking me to guest curate today's event. So in that illustrious poetry family, Alice Notley and sons Anselm and Edmund Berrigan. I think Eleanor is compiling or possibly has some questions or comments from people who are in the room. We're certainly open to that. I'm just going to start, though, with one question for Genya, because I know, Genya, you have you have an appointment that you need to go to shortly, and as a psychotherapist, it's important I not delay you from that appointment. But I did want to ask about the mix of languages, right? You hinted at it in some of the writing, but the mother tongue or the problematics of the mother tongue, but as someone who has translated from Russian, who's from the Ukraine, from Kyiv originally, could you say a little bit about how languages jostle with one another in your writing?
Oh, it's such an enormous and complex question. You know, one of the things that I was thinking as I was writing the last poem that I read is that my grandmother's first language was Yiddish and Ukrainian. My mother's was Ukrainian, then Russian. You know, mine was Russian, then English. Mm-hmm. And so there's a way that there are reverberations of those languages in my work, I think, just rhythmically. But I feel like I'm receptive in the Russian language rather than active. So I can translate, I can be a conduit, but I can't write in it freely or speak in it with confidence. But I can listen and I can hear it. But I can also take some of its textures, I think, into the English language, you know, right with a little bit of an accent.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Nina, is that same question? Is that reverberant for you, that question?
Thank you. I just have to.
So long. Thank you so much, Genya, for being here. We enjoyed hearing you.
If I could add, you know, juggling so many languages, I always tell my students when they start crying, really literally at La Sorbonne in France, because they can't master, they are traumatized by English language, and 100-year-old war is still going on. I mean, it never stopped there between England and France. But I tell them, I try to tell them something wise. It's not important if you make mistakes, if you know you don't have if you have certain accent, it doesn't matter. The most important thing is that one has something to say. If you have nothing to say, you can't say anything in any language, not even in your mother tongue. But if you have something to say, something meaningful or even nonsensical, like Lewis Carroll, it's beautiful. It's important to say in different languages.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I meant to mention that Nina has taught at the Sorbonne, at Paris 1 and Paris 5, where she's taught English language and literature, and then Paris 8 where she taught history of avant-garde theater. So yes. In France, you figure as a teacher of American poetry and English language. This is really interesting. Eleanor, are there questions for the Francophile side of the reading, Nimrod Bena and Michel Delville, that you're aware of?
We have not received any questions in the chat at this point, but if anyone would like to ask a question, feel free to raise your hand or
I saw Mick Jong-ar, who's downstairs, my spouse, put in a question in the chat room. Could you maybe unmute Jong-ar, Eleanor, so she could ask that question? Ningsha /Jong-ar there is the box. She's waving her arms.
Hi, Nina, long time no see, and we met each other many years ago in New York. I don't know if you remember me. The other half of Leonard Schwartz. I happen to speak Chinese, and right now, frantically learning French. I found this reading as if a present from Leonard to me, because I got to expose and practice all this French. Just so fantastic, so interesting. Nina, you mentioned to some of your students, the problem is if you don't have anything to say, you can't say anything. So I'm from ethnicity of Asian, and Asian woman has such a stereotype, and a lot of times we are considered the people who has nothing to say, which is not true. We may have problem with language, but a lot of times we are considered has nothing to say is because we never had the opportunity to say something. I'm just saying, when you talk to your student who has nothing to say, who are they? I'm just curious.
I'm just trying, like I said, there are a lot of problems that I wasn't aware of. As you have if you have something to say, if you'd like something to say, you can say in any language. However, you have nothing to say, meaning like if you really don't know or don't want to say anything, you'll be quiet in your mother tongue as well. So it's not, you don't need a foreign language, to be quiet. So I don't know.
No, it's interesting. Michel, is anything you could say on the issue of language, the crowd of languages, the way in which languages jostle with one of the whole question of something to say, nothing to say, and maybe how you say it being, I mean, when you talk about erasure and so on in your current practice, what might you add?
Yeah, I think erasure, and by the way, I'm finishing a book on erasure in the arts with Louis Armand, who was mentioned earlier, in connection with Nina. So this is another interesting connection. Working with found text and defacing them, disfiguring them, amounts to a kind of translation in a way. Maybe it's from the English to the English language. Maybe it's within a single language, but it's a kind of process which takes you from a source text to something that is in the making and that you are in charge of as an eraserist and as a writer of or a rewriter of texts. It's not necessarily what people used to call until maybe 10 years ago conceptual poetry. It can be an exercise in revisiting the canon, for example, which is why I myself, I'm not sure this is answering the question of whether I have anything to say or not, but I myself work with canonical texts, Lewis Carroll, Whitman, and I try to revisit them, expose some of their contradictions maybe, and perhaps also make them say something different to us than what is usually interpreted as what they have to say. So it's a kind of therapeutic exercise. It's about the return of the repressed, maybe, because sometimes when you work with text and you remove stuff, you realize that at the core of those texts, there's something that is more apparent than before, and however incongruous, and it's a kind of blasphemy. Sometimes it's awkward, and sometimes it's useless. It doesn't always work, but when it works, it can be really fun and interesting.
Yeah. Thank you, Michel. Also, Nimrod, I don't know. We have a question in the chat room from Thomas Panachuk. This is a question for all three poets. Do you think that anything is lost when translating from languages with grammatical gender into a language like English, which does not? What role does grammatical gender play in meaning? So I'm just going to piggyback on Thomas's question a little bit, and Nimrod, ask you to comment on your work and pivoting back and forth between French and your maternal language in Chad, and your life in France and your life in Central Africa, and perhaps Michel can also help us with interpretation if after you've spoken. Do unmute, please.
Merci beaucoup, Léonard. Je suis pas sûr d'avoir vraiment tout compris. Et Pas grand-chose d'ailleurs, et les questions que la personne a posées tout à l'heure, je suis pas sûr d'avoir aussi compris ce qu'elle voulait dire, à moins que tu me synthétises en quelques mots en français, ça m'aiderait, pour ne pas dire...
Peut-être on peut dire quelque chose sur la question de la langue française et la langue maternelle du Tchad, et comment se passe avec cet rapport entre les deux.
Merci beaucoup. En fait, ça, c'est des questions qui sont peut-être très faciles à débrouiller quand on est en Occident, quand on appartient vraiment à la culture européenne comme telle. Euh, pour le Tchadien que je suis, au Tchad, il y a plus de 500 langues. Je ne sais pas qu'est-ce que vous pouvez faire avec ça, hein? C'est extrêmement difficile. Évidemment, un Tchadien bien constitué parle au minimum 8 langues. Il en comprend une vingtaine à l'oreille, comme ça. Mais ces langues ne se font pas la guerre. Le processus de la traduction, c'est le processus naturel d'un homme et d'une femme. On est là parce que on peut traduire un autre, on peut comprendre, on peut lui parler dans une langue qu'il comprend et ainsi de suite. Donc, pour faire court, la plupart en Afrique, on a écrit que dans les langues de colonisation, français, anglais, portugais. Il y a le petit pays de Guinée qui fait aussi en espagnol. Bon, maintenant, les Africains commencent vraiment à se préoccuper, vouloir faire de la littérature dans nos langues. Mais c'est même très difficile parce que vous le faites, mais il n'y a pas un public pour. Déjà en français et en anglais, il y a à peine du public pour ça. Et donc, non, les questions n'ont pas il n'y a pas la réponse facile qu'on peut donner, qu'un occidental peut donner. Je ne sais même pas, par exemple, sur les 17 millions de Tchadiens, la tribu d'où je viens, ça fait à peine 15 000 âmes. Mais écrire dans cette langue, qui va me lire? Déjà au Tchad, quand je sors de la maison, je n'ai personne avec qui parler ma langue. Vous voyez? Donc, c'est très, très compliqué. C'est sûr que les Africains feront au siècle qui viennent des littératures dans leur langue, mais pour le moment, oui, on fait la littérature dans les langues impériales, quoi. Donc, le français, l'anglais, et ainsi de suite. Mais nos langues sont vivaces, elles sont vivaces, il y a aucun problème là-dessus.
C'est vraiment intéressant, Nimrod. Peut-être, perhaps just a moment. So, Michel, maybe you can offer an translation of what Nimrod just said. Unmute, please. Michel, unmute. Michel, you need to unmute. There we go.
Yeah, I was trying to unmute, but thank you, Nimrod, for this very eloquent and arresting answer to a very difficult question. And Nimrod's answer was twofold. First is that the question of translation, the first part of his answer was about the fact that the question of translation in Western countries is rather easy to deal with compared to the situation in Africa. In Chad, people speak more than 500 languages. Each citizen, if he's lucky or she's lucky, understands 20 languages, and those languages do not wage war against each other, translation being a natural process which allows us to interact with other people communicate with other people. It doesn't have to be a contrived or difficult thing. It's a natural thing. But Nimrod also draws our attention to the fact that most of, if not all, but most African writers are writing and publishing in the languages of the colonizers, English, French, Portuguese, Spanish, which is a necessity because, well, for historical reasons, obviously, but also because it would be very difficult to find an audience for a work produced in any of the languages that are spoken, for instance, in Chad. Nimrod mentioned the fact that the country comprises 17 million inhabitants. His tribe comprises 15,000 people, and that's a very narrow audience to write for. So there's basically, at this stage, very little audience for the native languages, the African languages. I hope I was faithful to what you were saying, Nimrod.
No.
Merci beaucoup, Michel. Merci infiniment.
Yeah. No, it's such an intriguing question, and we have the writer Ngugi wa Thiong'o from Kenya, who a few years back recently decided to stop writing in English and start writing in Kikuyu, his mother tongue, I think, thereby limiting from billions to a smaller group, the people who could read the work. Of course, then it's possible to translate it back into English. These are really, really intriguing questions, Nimrod. Chloe, Eleanor, I know we're up against it in terms of time. Is that correct? Hello, I must be going
Merci.
like that.
Merci, Nimrod.
Thank
you so much, everyone.
Thanks for having us, Leonard.
Thank you,
My pleasure.
Michel.
Hello, hi to Hattree.
Thank you, Nina.
再见，再见。
Bye.
And